All right, thank you for staying with Daybreak. Let's get into that conversation. So from today, if you're found in a public place without wearing a mask, that is in a supermarket, on the streets, on the vehicles, on the PSVs without a mask, you stand to be imprisoned for 6 months or fined 20,000 shillings or even both. Joining me on phone now is Eunice Lumallas. She's a lawyer and also a member of FIDA. Thank you so much for making time for us this morning, Eunice. So the question that everyone is grappling with right now is this legal?
Yes, it is legal, Trevor.
Yeah.
Because it's been already there's already rules.
Yeah.
To that effect. But we are hoping as Kenyans, and as you can see, the Law Society of Kenya has gone to court, and I am aware Parliament was looking at the rules yesterday, that the rules can be improved because there were some critical issues with those rules,
yeah, to
make them, more user-friendly and more effective. So yeah, I'm hoping that the rules can be improved both by Parliament and through the court process.
But
yes, it's legal. It's legal.
Many people are wondering whether the directives are more punitive, because this is 20,000 shillings or imprisonment for 6 months. The only reason somebody may not wear a mask is because they can't afford it to begin with. They've not been provided for free.
Trevor, I also tried to get some masks the other day and I couldn't find them in a chemist near me. So yes, there's the issue of accessibility of the mask and affordability, because most employers, from what I've heard and the complaints I've received, are asking employees to purchase their own masks. And some of these people have to make a decision between food and purchase of masks, particularly when you're told you have to dispose after maybe 12 of a certain number of hours. So that's why I'm hoping the rules can now be relooked afresh, because the issue of the penalties,
yeah, when
you look at Cap 2 of our rules, which is the General Interpretation Act, Section 31 gives a threshold, yeah, where a minister is enacting rules and regulations for penalties, and that is 6,000 or a sentence for not more than 6 months.
Yeah.
But then in these rules, we find that the CS has indicated that there will be a penalty of 20,000 Kenyan shillings.
Yeah.
Now, honestly, this is, it feels like the minister was, it just flies out of the face of reality.
Yeah.
And if you want to punish the people who are who will not be able to afford this money, are the poor. We don't want to discriminate against the poor in our society. You may afford the 20,000, but to many other people, this is a lot of money, particularly now where jobs are not certain, people are getting unemployed. So when you have rules like this, it shows that somehow the minister is out of touch with reality, and there's also another angle to it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Trevor, our police officers are still rogue. We still have a number of rogue officers, and this is a fact. And we have seen the ugly head of police recklessness and corruption rearing during this time of implementation of this rule. Okay.
Yeah.
So, last week I had a complaint about officers who they actually entered a private property, and the rules actually applied to public areas,
yeah,
and extorted money from the occupants of the estate, and they demanded a huge bribe of 70,000,
yeah,
where there was no wrongdoing. So police officers are entering private places, police officers are asking for bribes. So this 20,000 is just escalating the misery of Kenyans,
yeah,
under the arms of the executive, particularly the police officers.
So is this then, how then do you define public places? Because if there's an estate where there are more than 100 people or 70 people who live there, if you congregate in the midsection, is that considered a public place? Should you all be wearing masks?
Now, honestly, in terms of estates,
yeah,
tenants enter into agreement with the landlord, and landlords have a duty under that private treaty with the tenant to place guidelines on COVID. Because when you look at the regulations, and I hope the regulations define what a public place is. Okay?
Yeah.
They specifically define what a public place is. And they have not gone to, even in the definition area, looked at private place. So when someone entered an estate which is locked and a tenant pays for all the facilities and amenities to that estate, then they're actually breaching those regulations. The people to now get into agreement as to what will happen within the estate are the landlords and the tenants. The landlords ought to issue guidelines on how the people living in the estate ought to congregate, ought to live. And the issue of masks is about personal safety.
Yeah.
Therefore, ordinary people should still continue with keeping the distance, because social distance and physical distance where possible.
Yeah.
And wearing masks. But estates are private places. Those public places have been defined in the rules.
So now, the other thing is the issue of accessibility and affordability, Lumallas. From where you stand, can I use that as a defense when the rubber meets the road? Say I get arrested and I say, I tried to look for the mask, I couldn't find them. Is that defense enough? Or I simply could not afford?
You know what?
Yeah.
Nobody will listen to you, Trevor, when you bring the defense of I couldn't find, I couldn't afford. Okay? Because they will tell you the law is the law. These are the regulations. We need to enforce it. I've seen a clip of women in Muranga putting on underwear on their faces. I think that must have been a protest, in my view.
Yeah.
Because you're putting a law in place. You have not put in measures, and we hope there will be accountability of funds sent to Kenya for the purpose of combating COVID-19, because we expect that the government ought to make the mask. And I saw yesterday from the press briefing, they are now distributing some masks across the counties, because these things are just not available. Even the private entities are trying to make the masks. I mean, they're not catching up with the demand. Unfortunately, it's not a defense. And I'm happy, very happy with the Law Society of Kenya going to court to have the rules challenged on the basis of public participation, on the basis of discrimination against the poor and the vulnerable in the society. The fact that the rules have not been passed by the Assembly, by Parliament, as is required under the Delegated Legislation Act. I'm very happy with that, because even having the COVID rules does not mean we have suspended our constitution, for example, or other enabling laws. We are still a state under the rule of law, and we must respect that. Okay.
So now there's been a rise in sexual violence cases as well. Is that your experience as a lawyer? Have you seen that as well right now in the COVID-19 period? Are we associating it with the right thing, or this is just happening across board without necessarily being related to COVID-19?
Honestly, there has been evidence of increased cases of domestic violence, both reported and before the court during the COVID, the period of the pandemic outbreak. Okay? So that shows it's real that the cases of violence within the safety of homes is escalating during this period. Okay? So that there's evidence to show that there is an increase in domestic violence. Cases. And we have seen some of the domestic violence cases increasing. Okay? So this is true. It's happening. The only problem, in my view, is that a lot of organizations dealing with matters of NGOs and other organizations, even FIDA, dealing with matters of abuse, both sexual violence and just domestic violence, are not so accessible right now because of the pandemic. And that just exacerbates the vulnerability of those victims of violence during this time. You know, so it is happening. And one can only imagine that it is going to increase if the period is going to be extended. Okay? Yes, it is likely to increase.
Okay. I'm just trying to get through a lot of issues that have come up, legally speaking, with you there, Eunice Lumallas, because we've now moved from sexual violence. Let's talk about the issue of rent. Most people are saying that rent needs to be reduced. What is the legal way of going around such a need or such a want by the people?
Well, there has to be justification. We would all be happy if rents in commercial places and residential houses sometimes are increased if you're on the side of the paying individuals, not so on the side of the landlord, where there are no measures to push on the landlord. You know, some of the landlords are paying mortgages, and so far there are no measures by commercial banks that we have seen coming to push on those landlords, and that's something that we have to understand. It has to be a holistic approach. Okay, there are organizations that deal with the issues of landlords, for example. And for me, what can only happen right now would be private treaty, because let's face it, Trevor, our country is not a developed country, unfortunately. And we will not expect our country to come up with far-reaching measures as we have seen, for example, in Australia, where homesteads are being provided or funds, or in the US. And therefore, what I can advise for now would be just a good faith agreement. Okay, so that there's no legal provision that can force landlords, for example, not to charge. It has to be out of either private treaty where you agree with your tenants, or you give them a grace period, or something like that. Or then the government comes out with measures that will push on the landlords, particularly where they are commercial. There are loans with the commercial banks, for example. But otherwise, there is nothing that can compel landlords not to charge rent. So this has to be agreement between tenants, and they have to seek out their landlords to see if they can give them some push on them from the pandemic vagaries of no money, for example, no employment. But then, other than that, there are no legal compulsive measures so far.
All right. Thanks, Eunice. Yes. That's Eunice Lumallas. She's a lawyer and member of FIDA, speaking to us on phone. Now, you know, from today, if you walk out in a public place without a face mask, you'll be arrested by the police. You'll be charged 20,000 shillings, or you face a jail time of 6 months, or even both, for just not wearing the mask. But even then, Colonel Cyrus Oguna says that they will provide masks to the most vulnerable people. They just haven't started yet, but they will. All right? So we're taking a quick break now here on Daybreak. When we come back, Zinzi will be speaking to Gladys Boss. She's the Uasin Gishu women representative. Talk about the issue of the priorities that the August House should have in terms of dealing with COVID-19, all right? And there's one thing that they're unanimous about: no pay cuts. See you in just a bit.